So when we start getting further into the classifications, something beyond the three domains, we start getting into like there's a lot more that goes on in here, right? So here's some animals, right? We could say, hey, these are all animals. They all share animal characteristics. But once you start getting closer, you'd say, well, they're all vertebrate animals. They all have vertebra, a backbone, spinal column. But beyond that, it's hard to say the same anymore. We say, okay, well, these two are the same. They're both reptiles, the cold-blooded, but these two would be mammals. And if we even got even further, we'd say, well, these two mammals are not really that much the same. This one's a carnivore, and this one's a herbivore. So there would be two different levels when we start dividing them all the way down. So the classification system from general to specific is domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Lots of people use different sentences to help remember this. The one I used, I had a really crazy biology teacher in high school. Ray Werthner from St. Martin High School, awesome biology teacher. Many shouts out to him for helping me to get where I am now. He walked in the door one day and said, "Dumb, kinky people can only fight Girl Scouts." And we all turned around and looked at him and were like, "What did you say?" I think he's gone crazy. Just leave your stuff and go. He's going to hurt somebody, but he didn't. Dumb, kinky people can only fight Girl Scouts. You'll never forget it. What can dumb, kinky people do? They can only fight Girl Scouts. Who can only fight Girl Scouts? Dumb, kinky people. So if you get on the exam or on the test, that's an easy way to remember it. Oops, sorry. So each rank, or taxon as they're called, consists of organisms that share a unique set of traits, and they're based on one of the three, or sometimes all the three following. Morphological traits just means structural traits, like their bones. Are their bones all very similar? Well, if they are, well then that's a morphological trait they have in common. Like the forearms, like your forearm and the forearm of a horse, and the forearm of a cat. They all share many of the same bones, suggesting that we come from a common ancestor. Biochemical traits such as DNA, which is a big one that we use now, and also behavioral traits, how things respond to stimuli is a great way to kind of categorize things. And we actually still use a lot of this today. DNA is the big one that we use now. It wasn't available back in the day, but we use that a lot now. So whenever we start getting down to the other end, we've done domain, we've kind of looked through the system, now we're looking down towards the species, genus and species side of things. This is going to be very specific things, okay? So taxonomy is the science of naming and classifying a species, and generally whenever we do that, we use a two-part naming system consisting of the genus and the species. So the species is just the specific type of organism that they are, whereas the genus is the group of very closely related species that all share very common things. For example, Panthera leo. Panthera, and this is all Latin or Greek, and there's rules for writing it, but we're not worried about that right now, but just know Panthera leo. Panthera, panther, right? That's what it sounds like. That means big cat. So this is the genus of all the big cats, but which specifically one are we talking about? We're talking about Leo. Panthera leo. So what does the Leo mean? It means noble. So we're talking about the noble big cat. Well, that's the lion. Panthera leo. We can't just say Leo, because Leo is just an adjective that describes the noun of panther, or panthera. For example, a Panthera tigris should be really easy, right? That's the tiger. Well, they're both in the same genus, but they have different they're a different species. If we just said tigress, well, there's a couple different things called tigress out there, because again, they're just that's the adjective that describes the noun. So you're an animal. So we're in the genus Homo, and we are a species sapien. We're actually consider ourselves a subspecies, Homo sapiens sapiens, but simply just means wise man. And we are one of 5 different species that are in our same genus. Now, all of the other 4 are extinct. Some of them we outcompeted, some of them we bred out. Some of their DNA can still be found inside of us. If you ever do 23andMe, or like the, what's it called? The Ancestry.com, you can do the DNA test, and they'll send you information about where certain parts of your chromosomes come from. And for the 23andMe, they'll actually include Neanderthal. So they can actually tell you how much Neanderthal you have in you. My ancestors are from Germany, and it just happens that Neanderthal means the man from the Neander Valley, and the Neander Valley is actually in Germany. So I kind of wonder like how far my ancestry goes back in that area, because I like to get that done and see if I have a whole lot of Neanderthal DNA in me. So that'd just be fun. But anyway, we're the last of 5 members of our genus, so Homo sapiens. Okay. So when we talk about taxon, classifying things, here's like a little bit of help and a little bit of practice for you. So I've got a bunch of organisms up here, right? If we go through and start breaking them down and say how they're different, well, in a very generalized way, they are all animals. So there's no plants up here, there's no fungi, they're all animals. So that's how they're similar. But how are they different? Well, these are all mammals, meaning they have hair, they give birth to live young, they feed them with milk. These are all birds. You're probably thinking, birds, there's a T-Rex in there. Yeah, just wait for it. But these are all birds. Why? Well, they all have feathers. T-Rex had feathers, not the adults, but the babies did. We'll get that in just about a minute, but they all have feathers, and they all lay eggs, and they're all warm-blooded, just like we are. But if you start looking like, let's just take this group up here, and you start looking at how this group is the same and how it's different. Well, all these live around the ocean, right? But let's see, these two are a lot different. These 3 never really go up on shore, but these 2 can, right? Seals and sea lions. Have you ever seen a whale up on shore that looks happy? No, you have not. Seals and sea lions are actually in the carnivore order of mammals, whereas these are in cetacea. They live in the ocean their entire lives. They never come up on land, whereas these come up on land. If you start looking at the differences between a seal and a sea lion, well, they're very similar. So they could probably be in the same genus, probably in the same family, but they're not the same species. They're just 2 different. How? Well, there's a behavior that they exhibit that really helps separate them out. It's easy to tell a seal from a sea lion, especially if you see them swimming. A seal, when he swims through the water, he pushes with his back legs and steers with his front. A sea lion pushes with his front legs and steers with his back. So that behavior is opposite for them. Because some seals do look like sea lions, and some sea lions do look like seals. But the easiest way to tell is, hey, how are they moving through water? What's their behavior like? Now for the whales and dolphins, these guys stay out in the water a lot more often. They don't really come up on shore. You could say that the whale would probably be a little bit different from the rest of them because this guy lives in open water, and he can get a lot bigger, whereas these guys tend to live up closer to shore, and they use the shoreline as a barrier to push fish up against and helps them catch and eat fish. They got smaller, right? But what's the difference between whales and dolphins? Well, and it's not size. The big difference between them is behavior. Anybody here speak whale? Right, like Dory. Whales sing. Dolphins and porpoise, they click and they whistle. That's a behavior. So let me give you a hint. A killer whale, does it sing or does it click and whistle? Well, the answer is it clicks and whistles. So the killer whale is actually the world's largest dolphin. Weird to think of, but that's how it is, right? So the Achirus orcai is actually the world's largest dolphin. So how are these? What about our birds down here? Well, penguins, they're still birds, lay eggs, got feathers, warm-blooded, take care of their young, got a beak. Parrot, starting to look a little bit more like that T-Rex, right? Anybody ever take a parrot off? They can be pretty vicious. While growing up, my grandmother's turkey chased me around the yard a few times, and that thing's like a little velociraptor. Here's a ostrich. Somebody said in one of my classes, well, a T-Rex doesn't have front wings, it can't fly, so it's not a bird. I'm like, really? I put this picture up, and they're like, oh. I'm like, yeah. Ostriches can't fly either, but they're not a T-Rex. So what do these have in common? Well, they all have feathers at some point during their lives. Where did feathers come from? Well, feathers originated in a species of dinosaurs, theropods, meaning that they have three-toed, two-legged and three-toed. The line of velociraptors and a couple other lines. There's actually a group called aves, as in avian, as in aviation, birds, where as the Earth was getting colder in the Cretaceous period, And it was more like in the northern parts of the U.S. and southern parts of Canada, and the temperature was getting drier and colder. Being large helped you move around a bunch because you could be warm-bodied, but as a baby, um, you had to have a way to conserve that heat. Well, there's a mutation in some of the scales, and they came out all fluffed and feathery, and that helped conserve body heat. It became a beneficial trait, which was nature selected for. Those babies with the feathers survived longer and were more likely to reproduce because they survived. And because of that, um, the having feathers kind of took off. It's a good thing to have. Um, but at first, it wasn't used for flight. They were just used to keep warm. Later on through evolution, we see that the feathers actually developed for flight, usually in gliding and controlled gliding and slight powered gliding, eventually leading to actual powered thrust flight for short distances. And then we see today we have birds that can go long distances with very good powered flight. So it's modification of feathers for keeping warm became feathers for flight. So that's what all of these have together. As a taxonomist, as a person that studies and classifies things, that's some of the characteristics you would use to group these guys together. And of course, that's based on evidence and observations. So back in the day, how did they do this? They didn't have DNA like we did today. So early naturalists actually used how they looked and where they lived to classify organisms. You tell me, look at all these moths. Is this one species? Is this many different species? Is this males and females, females, juvenile males? What? I mean, that's hard to do. They're very, very similar in the way that they look. What about these pipers and sand plovers? Well, you know, it's really difficult to say male and female, and juvenile male. Are these all same species? Are these very different populations? At different times of year plumage? It's hard to tell. So how do we do it now? We actually use biochemical trait of DNA to go through and sequence it and say, well, what are the similarities that they share? Because DNA is a blueprint for building something, and if blueprints are very identical, then the thing you're making will look very identical. So with us and some of the other the hominids, some of the other primates that are out there, humans and chimpanzees share a huge section of DNA. Matter of fact, only a little part of it is different. Chimpanzees and gorillas share a good portion of their DNA. And then orangutans are a little bit outgrouped from the rest of us, but still we share a lot of DNA that's very similar in sequence. Because our blueprints are the same, a lot of what we do and how we act and behave is the same. If you ever see the skeletons of humans compared to chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, it's really hard to tell some of them apart. Easier than you may think, but it's a little harder to tell some of them apart because they're very, very similar. But we don't have to worry about using sight where they live. We can use DNA now, so that's great.